I want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost, and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken, and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald-Burrows. Welcome to another episode of Odyssey of the Apocalypse. I think that we left off with talking about a dragon and a couple of beasts, and it's also quite natural that we often don't finish the chapter that we're on. I'm not going to guarantee that we will do any differently today. We'll finish the one we didn't finish last week, and of course, we'll go on to the next one. If you remember last week, we left off with the fact that the dragon represented the ego or self-will, which has within it the enticements of the corporeal or earthly world. And as a result of this, what the eye sees, the mind beholds. So the dragon feeds the mind, which is, of course, that first beast, by preconcepts, ideas, and the things that we perceive in the human world build in us ideas, desires, and so on. And then the second beast represented the physical body, which just naturally goes in the way of these desires. We desire something, and the next thing you know, we're traipsing after it. The sad thing about desires is it's very difficult to get them fulfilled. It seems like if a person buys a boat, for instance, the next thing they want to buy a larger boat. Then they need a larger motor, and then you have to have the things for the seats, and then they want, then you need to skis so that the boat can pull someone on water skis, and so it goes on, and it seems like we never quite get to the end. And by the time we have a boat that suits us and we can water ski and we have most of the things that are necessary on the boat wears out. So there we are looking at another one. So this is why it talks about the desires that we have, because our fondness for a single thing draws lots of other things. Like, for instance, we might be interested in golf. Well, we have to look at golf bags, we have to look at golf clubs, we have to look at places where we're going to play golf. Then we want to get, if possible, yearly tickets to play golf at some country club, and then we buy golf magazines, and then we watch golfing on television. So whenever we have a single thing like this, it seems like it just mushrooms and causes in us all of these desires to spring out. So this is one of the primary reasons on the spiritual path why there is a curtailing of these desires. And when this divine nature has been incarnated, he starts to wean the soul away from the desires. Because when these desires are absent, then of course there is great peace. So he teaches us to be more and more happy with what we have, and instead of looking out there and seeing what else we need. As a general rule, I find when we go shopping, we look at what we need and not always what we have. So this is all part of it when we talk about the ego and self-will, which feeds the mind, and how the mind in turn feeds the physical body. And then of course the physical body has eyes, or the senses, and the mind perceives through the senses and feeds the ego. So it goes around and around in a circle. And I think we left off just coming along with, looks to me like was it the second beast? Let me see. I'm just making certain to see what beast we were on. So if we can kind of go back to to verse 11, and of course for those of you who are working with your King James Bible, we're on chapter 13. For those of you who have Odyssey, we're still on chapter 13, the beast of the sea. And I think as we go to scripture 11, or 11, and behold, another beast coming out of earth, and he had two horns like the lamb, and he spake as the dragon. So this is that third beast, which is our function, or the way we live in the corporeal world, that we're following the concept of the senses. And that, of course, is kind of like this, speaks like the wily dragon, because many things that we desire are not necessarily the things that we need. And he exercised power over the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And of course this meant that the mind which had followed the dragon, for a little while, the wound is healed as the person starts through this remarkable transformational change, when first the divine light is there, and then all of a sudden all of the senses of the physical world, the deep levels of the subconscious, preconceived ideas, all of this come roaring out, so that we have to look at it, evaluate, and also to change our ways. So since it is appeased, we find ourselves wanting to go on the spiritual path, which caused us to draw unto God and to his Son, or that light that is in us. Then for a little while, the torments of this, of the senses and the mind, kind of seem to be stilled. Now that the purification of the soul has come, all of this is let loose again. So this is what it means that the deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, and he made fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of man. And fire like this represents fame and glorification, and which riches, the things of worldly gain. And he deceived them, because so often we are deceived by thinking that wealth and fame will bring us great happiness. But we have only to look at movie stars and how short-lived they were. Of what use sometimes did their fame bring them and their wealth? They lost their wealth. They became often compassed by expensive cars, fur coats, jewels, and the next thing you know, their money is gone. And with their aging process, many of these great stars fell by the side of the road. It's not only that, it's politics. It's today a person is the head of a corporation. Tomorrow that corporation may be going into bankruptcy. And so that's kind of the way the corporeal world is. And so it is simply saying that it deceives us into thinking that these are the real things of life. And of course they are not. They are temporal things, subject to change day by day. We can always discern the real and the non-real by what changes. Our outside world changes every day. It is therefore temporal. That which is God, and that which rules and governs and runs the universe of the stars, that is unchanging. So in us is that Ark of the Covenant, which has the law of God, which is unchanging. That is real. So it deceives them on earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwelt on earth or were bound to earth, that they should make an image of the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did not live, had been wounded by the vision of the holy quest, by truth and justice, who now had come up for a final battle, because all things strive to live, including the old way of life. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, meaning that he had the power that the beast should speak it, and many. It talks about the false values when it talks about this beast speaking the false values that we have in life. When John came to me on the Isle of Hawaii, it came out more or less like this, and the ways of earth were powerful upon the soul. But seeing its indiscretions, it prepares to turn away from the false values and come unto the Lamb. In other words, as ego and self-will are going to surrender to divine will. And that's what it meant. And cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And killed doesn't mean, of course, the death of the physical body, but the death of the human elements of life. We've talked about this, that 666, the sign of the beast, represents the embodiment of the soul into the world of matter. Now matter is going to die as the soul comes forth and becomes divine in the seventh and final epoch of creation. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead. And of course, the mark is nothing more than a black mark, because those who follow the ways of the beast, the self-will, of desires and wealth and fame. Now, that's not to say it's wrong to have wealth or fame or to be known. But if we deceive ourselves into believing that that's going to bring us happiness and that that is the focus and joy of life, then, alas, that becomes a false value. And we walk in darkness. In the right hand, as we talked about earlier in the Apocalypse, the right hand represents righteous, the God. The left hand has always been that supportive hand, except for left-handed people, of course. So the left hand is usually signified the human world, the right hand, the world of God, because God is righteous, and left, of course, is supports, like earth supports the spiritual nature of God. And so, of course, since anyone following the path of the dragon and the two beasts walk in darkness and ignorance and unknowing, of course, there's nothing, this mark is nothing more than a black mark upon the right hand, or that which is righteous. And that no man might buy or sell save that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name, meaning that those who had not raised the divine spark, entered or brought forth this holy Christ in them in the resurrection of the dead, would still barter, buy and sell. Literally, I'm careful how I say this, because you see, as a people, we're really very, very good people. We simply walk in unknowingness so many times, but we often barter ourselves. Many people do, like a person who would go out and steal in order to fulfill some of their desires, has sold a piece of their soul for the price of a desire. So these are the only ones that are going to go out. Those that still walk in darkness and ignorance and unknowingness are the only ones that are going to barter and sell the aspects of their soul for riches and fame and fortune, and do what they don't like to do, and say things about people they don't want to say in order to achieve these goals. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. And before I go into that next line, I don't know how people have missed this throughout 2,000 years of this adventuresome experience of trying to resolve the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. He specifically states that the beast means of man. He says, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. Meaning, and his number is 666. Meaning, of course, the body and the soul and the spirit are bound to the corporeal nature. If we take each one separately, we would say that 6 represents the 6th epoch of creation. Remember, in review, we had darkness to light, light to matter, matter to vegetation, vegetation to fish and fowl to animal, animal to man, and man to angel. So 6 means man, human. And then, of course, the 600 represents the indwelling Christ nature, the spiritual nature, the light, and the soul, which are enmeshed into the world of matter. 600, 2 zeros, the 2 selves enmeshed in the world of matter. So his number is 600, 60, body, soul, and spirit, all bound to the world of matter. Let those who understand the mysteries count the number of the beast, for it is 666, the number of man, whose body, soul, and spirit are enmeshed in the 6th evolutionary cycle of progression, or human life. See Genesis 1, 27, 31. That concludes that chapter and will take us on to chapter 14. I call chapter 14 the Reapers. And what might be a bit confusing to us is we will come into 3 angels here, and each one of these 3 angels correlate to the dragon and the 2 beasts. One angel is going to pour his vial out on earth, another angel is going to pour his vial out on the mind, and another angel is going to pour his vial, or her vial, whichever way, his vial onto the soul. So these are pretty much the same: self-will, the mind, and the body. And the scripture I chose to depict this chapter, which I call the Reapers, was Galatians 1 and verses 15, 16. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, to reveal his Son in me. How we miss the fact this great Christ or light dwells in us, I don't know, but we have. To reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen. Immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. As we move into this chapter, it's full of symbolism, as have all the other chapters been. And so if we can go to verse 1. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And so, of course, he said, I looked and he saw the Lamb on Mount Zion. Mount Zion represents that pinnacle of enlightenment. Like when we go from earth and we climb a mountain, we get to the top of the mountain, we can see the view all around. But when we're of earth, before we have climbed the mountain, we can only see the mountain up ahead of us. We cannot see the view that would surround the whole mountain. So here he's saying that he saw the indwelling Christ, standing on Mount Zion, meaning once again John has gone into that higher state of consciousness, that ascended state, in which now he is perceiving the indwelling Christ. So he saw him standing on Mount Zion, and he had with him all of those that had given birth, of course, to the Lamb, and this was 144,000. We, of course, have talked about this on a couple of different occasions, but one last time, because you see, each week we seem that we have new people join us, and we hear from these new people, and realizing they haven't had the earlier episodes, we try to guide them so they are not missing too much. Remember, the 144 I always preferred to kind of draw this way, because we could understand it better. This meant that the indwelling Christ, that great light, is bound by the four elements to the world of matter. The soul is bound by the four elements to the world of matter, and that they must return to oneness. And in order to return to one, they must purify the body and the soul and the spirit. These must become one in order for this to complete the resurrection of the dead. So 144,000 is a symbolic number of purification, not a quantity, as many have come to believe in the past. So the 144,000 represents those who have, of course, passed through and completed the resurrection of the dead, having united the two selves in the return to the one God. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters. And whenever I think in terms of hearing a voice from heaven, I think of the voice of God. God can and does speak, even though he is a consciousness of 150 billion galaxies. And his voice is as deep and melodious as, I guess, the most beautiful sounds of the running waters or the deep roar of the ocean. And it said that he had a voice of great thunder. And he heard the voice of harpers harping their harps. And so many waters means that God speaks through many languages. It doesn't make any difference whether we are Chinese, Japanese, Norwegian, or American, or Indian. None of this makes any difference, because there is but one God. And each language understands him. He speaks that same language through them, so that Japanese will understand him as Japanese. We will understand him in the English language. So he is many waters flowing through all nations, and all nations understand him in their own particular language. And of course, the voice of harpers harping on their harps is, we talked about probably the harp before, and I called my book on Jesus' life when I wrote it, The Harp of Destiny, primarily because the harp was looked upon as a human being, the old harp in its earlier days, and that as a person strums the harp, this represented the Spirit of God flowing through the world of matter, playing his music of his divine law through all creation as it manifests and changed. So here's the voice of harpers, and so this is the flow of the Spirit through the corporeal senses. And of course, he's going to, we're going to go on to say that he sang, they sang a new song. And of course the new song is the truth of reality, not as our understandings have been of the past, but as they are becoming today and as they will be tomorrow. Because our world of today and tomorrow is so different than it was 2,000 years ago even. So, and they sung a new song before the throne and before the four beasts. and the elders. And no man could learn the song but the 144,000 who were redeemed from earth. So only those passing through the resurrection of the dead can truly understand the mysteries of life, because until we have passed through, we don't see clearly. An example of this would be that when we see someone in a casket, we think of them dead. We don't think of this, of whoever is in the casket, that this is only their shell, and that the soul that was in it has stepped out of it because it was either injured or worn out. So we do not see clearly. Once we have completed the resurrection of the dead, or even entered into the resurrection of the dead, we begin then to perceive things in its reality. And we sing a new song. It's a song, it isn't music as it were, but the words talks about immortality and infinity, and gone is the fear of death and loneliness and old age. Well, we can go on and on. So it is simply saying that they sang before the throne and before the indwelling Christ, and before the soul which had entered into the marriage of the Lamb through sacrifice, purification, and by transcending the four major obstacles of the corporeal world. And no one could learn the song except those that passed into the resurrection. These are they which are not defiled by woman, for they are virgins. And here I must stop, because I have marked and penned a note that the indwelling Christ has been raised in mankind through the Immaculate Conception. In other words, when in the world of matter, when the soul reaches for God, the union of the soul and God bring forth the birth of His Son in them. This is the birth of the Holy Christ is a birth that is by Immaculate Conception. We became quite confused on this way back in New Testament times in the history of Jesus, because of course He was born of Immaculate Conception by the Virgin Mary, and so we perceived that the Holy Virgin Mary then was impregnated by God and not by Joseph. So it's kind of difficult to explain, but nevertheless, Mary was known as a virgin, not because of being a virgin, but because she was raised in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem as a temple virgin. We find this in the scriptures that were written by Jesus' brother, half-brother James, who wrote much about which was found in the Apocryphal New Testament, which wrote much about Jesus' grandmother and grandfather, and more about his half-brothers and sisters. Because Mary and Joseph, of course, only had the one child, Jesus. But Joseph had had 4 children by a preceding marriage. And Mary, it's a wonderful story, and of course we covered this quite thoroughly in Mystic Christianity. So those of you who may have seen that series, we hope that we don't bore you too much. But it happened to be that at the time that Anna and Joachim, who were Jesus' grandmother and grandfather, they wanted a child. And Anna was getting on in years and had still not produced a child. And in the times of Israel, this was a great sin. This meant that God had cursed the womb of a woman who could not bear a child, thus bringing great shame upon her in the eyes of her fellow man. Then, of course, she, in tremendous despondency, and even more so after they went to the Temple of Jerusalem, and her husband's gift of sheep was not received by the temple. The gatekeeper of the temple said, "What right have you to bring an offering to God when God has cursed you and you can produce no children?" So Joachim, being tremendously despondent also and ashamed, I don't know about despondent, but he was very much ashamed. And he went off to take his herds out and to be with them. And Anna was now left not only childless, but also they would look upon her as a widow because her husband had left her because she couldn't produce a child. So she goes in the midst of the great celebration of the Feast of the Passover when all of this happened. She goes and she is crying. She's in the garden out by their home, and an angel comes to her and tells her that she will conceive and she will bring forth a child, and that the child shall be called Mary. So the angel said, go to the gate because your husband has also received these tidings, and he comes. And in their union then, Anna gave birth to Mary, who would become Jesus' mother. But she had made a vow to the angel. She said that she would give the child to God. If such a miracle happened to her, she would give the child to God. So thus it was in about the 3rd year of Mary's birth that Joachim came to her and said, we must keep our vow to take the child to God. So it meant taking her to the Temple of Jerusalem to be raised as a temple virgin, because it was believed that only virgins could sew the silks and the curtains and draperies and cloths that were needed for rites. These could only be done by virgins. So constantly in the Temple of Jerusalem were housed, of course, certainly a certain number of virgins. So Mary was dedicated to the Temple of Jerusalem and raised as a temple virgin. She wasn't left too much without a family, however, because at that time her uncle was a high priest of the Temple of Jerusalem. His name, of course, was Zacharias, and who was the spouse to Elizabeth, who would later give birth to John the Baptist. So John the Baptist, of course, and Jesus were cousins, as was Jesus and John the Beloved. So then in the 13th year of Mary's life, and we got off on this subject because of talking about the Immaculate Conception, the 12th year of her life, rather, they came to Zacharias and said, you've got to do something, because Mary, of course, was coming into puberty, and she would absolutely pollute the temple. So it was necessary then to find her a husband. And Joseph, who was quite recently widowed, had several children. And he was also a member of the Sanhedrin Council. His work as a carpenter was respected all through Israel. And he was also of noble lineage. He was a descendant of King David ben Jesse. You can read that in the 1st chapter of Matthew if you want to track that down yourself. So they picked Joseph to become a spouse to Mary, who also was a descendant to King David ben Jesse. Joseph had taking a young 12-year-old virgin to wife was certainly had no intention of touching her in a physical way. However, when Mary came to him and said she was going to have a child, meaning she had received a vision that she was to have this child, Joseph really gravely questioned whether or not he should play a role in this, because he thought surely with Mary, with her visions, was probably a bit insane. He was a very stoic, a proud man, a stoic man, a man who was himself not subject to visions. And then we have this in Matthew, that the angel came unto him and told him to take Mary as his wife. And so he did as the angel bid and took unto him his wife. So Immaculate Conception was not meant that God descending into the womb of Mary's body would bring forth this physical body which Jesus had, but rather that Jesus, who is one with the light and one with God, who is of Immaculate Conception, is that soul which is coming in to the embodiment of Mary. And for this reason, it was looked upon, of course, as an Immaculate Conception. So that's what we have here, because when it uses the term of Immaculate Conception here, or basically, it is that soul which has reached for God and through the union with God has given birth to a son. And this is not done between two physical people. And that Mary was probably divine in this way too, there is no doubt. Truly, certainly the light of God descended over her, but it still took Joseph to help her to create the physical body or embryo for that soul to enter into. So those that were not defiled by woman, for they were virgins, meaning having entered into the resurrection and brought forth the birth of the Son of God in them without union of man and woman, these are they which follow the Lamb. In other words, not so much Jesus, the man or Jesus who became known as Christ, but they follow the directions that's given to them by the divine spark, which is now, of course, incarnate in them. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were the redeemed among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. It means that they had no dishonesty, because this had been purified as we go through the transformation of human to divine, or the resurrection of the dead. The dishonesty is taken out of us. We no longer would dare lie, or to steal, or to kill, or to hate, or to lust, or to these things are things that we would simply not do. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having an everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell upon earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. And so many people believe that this new gospel is the New Testament. But the new gospel in reality is that gospel of reality, which Jesus taught to his disciples in secret, the truth about the resurrection, the immortality of the soul, infinity, the mysteries of 150 billion galaxies. It's a world that is so far expanded beyond that of the way I remember it even 30 years ago. So the everlasting gospel can never be changed. People come to me and they say, oh, that is just your truth and this is my truth. I am sorry, people, there isn't your truth and my truth. Truth is truth. And when we come unto truth, it is never changing. And someday all mankind comes unto truth. And when it is, then we will find no separation of religion. There will not be one denomination and another. I feel as long as one calls themselves a Methodist and another one may call themselves a Presbyterian or a Mormon or Indian or Hindu, we have put a barrier between us. We're all of one God, and the only true worship and the only true church, and you're going to find this out in the end when the Foursquare Church is built. There is but one true religion, one true church, and that is the union of the soul with God and the worship that is encompassed thereof. That the Holy Church, of course, is built in the soul. And it is the individual worship of God, which is the only true religion. If we must give it a name, then that's all right for now. But someday, we'll throw names away, and that difference will no longer exist. So, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of judgment is come. And worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of water. I think that needs no explanation. In the heart of every human being, even an atheist, I have found they believe in something. They may not believe in churchianity. They may not believe in saviors. But somehow we all sense that there is some power that runs this universe of the stars, and that His will is flowing through and manifesting through all life. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink with the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And this causes me to kind of have to skip over here into a chapter about chapter 17. We're not going to be here long, so I don't necessarily recommend that you open to it unless you can do it quickly. Chapter 17 is going to be called Babylon, Harlot of Rome. And Babylonia is the ancient city-state of the plain of Shinar, coming from the term Akkadian Babalu, which means gate of the god. Its name originated from the Hebrew root balal, meaning to confound. And of course, this came about because of the multitude of languages that was spoken in Babylonia, and that the Tower of Babel meant the tower of all the babbling of the people, because it was a meeting place of many tribes. So it was found by the descendants of Cush and followers of Nimrod, but did not come into prominence until approximately 1830 BC. The city reached its greatest period of glory under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar from 605 to 462 BC, and began its decline. And this is important, not so much to remember the history, but why John uses Babylonia to symbolize so much the deterioration that we, through our corporeal interests, do to our planet. We destroy cities without realizing, with pollution because we don't plant parks, with heavy traffic, with the tremendous seeking of power and the necessity of trying to find wealth in order to live, so that soon we're existing and not really living. And this was happening way back in ancient times as well as today. So it said it began its decline when Nebuchadnezzar was succeeded on the throne by Amel-Marduk. October 13, 539 BC, Babylon fell to Cyrus of Persia, after which the process of deterioration returned most of the region to the desert from which it came. And that teaches us, if we do not take care of what God has given to us on earth, we destroy the lands. It will go back to desert, just like it did then. For this reason, John the Beloved selected Babylon to represent the carnage and corruption occurring through collective and individual abuse of natural and cosmic law. Just as the city had been returned to desolation because of its willful ways, so would the soul become barren because it had placed its values in the outer adornments of a temporal world. We will be coming back, of course, to chapter 17 in the future, but that was one of the reasons that he used the word Babylon. Let me see now. Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So, so the soul now has fallen. It in the sense that it perceives the ways that it violated or transgressed natural and cosmic law. We're not saying, of course, the soul is immortal, so it's not going to be destroyed, but it just represents the desolation that comes on the soul when the soul takes a look at its past. And a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive the mark or in his hand, the same shall drink from the wine of the wrath of God." To me, this is represented the law of cause and effect. Because if we continue in the ways of destruction, perhaps of drugs and of alcohol, and not taking care of the land which God has given us, then we have to drink of the consequence of this. So the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone. Now, this really sounds bad. So if we hadn't made up our mind we didn't want to go through this before, we probably are doing that now. And once again, remember, this journey is the most fantastic journey you'll ever take, and it's full of adventures around every turn. And the terminology that is used to represent this purification process, yes, of course we go through purification. Of course we don't want to look at ourselves. Of course we're accustomed to the ways of self-will. But our heart, our soul, the indwelling Christ, all these want to follow the way of good. That's why, as an overall, I feel that our world is a world of good, regardless of what goes on in newspapers and on television and the news, all of this. I still and will always believe that the world is good. So it isn't something which should cause us to be so fearful of it. But it does simply say that the fire and brimstone, the retaliation for the violation of natural and cosmic law, causes us to learn our lessons. And I try to imagine life without lessons. Let's just imagine that you are what you are, and that you will never be anymore. And you have to ask yourself if you're really satisfied with what you are. Most people are going to answer no. They want to be more than what they are. And that is natural, because there's a part, this part of God in us continues to motivate us to continue to climb the ladder toward higher and higher, not so much goals, but to higher and higher consciousness. What is it that drives a mountain climber up another mountain? He climbs a mountain. He has been successful. He has challenged the wild. And then the next week he wants to climb a higher one. What is this driving force that causes us to want to be more than what we are, and to climb a mountain that is higher than what we climbed before? It is that power of perfection that's in us. And it will continue to motivate us until we reach a more perfect state. And we can no more stop this than we could stop the wind from blowing. Thank heavens. So none of us are going to have to remain the way we are. We will have the opportunity to become more. And so we are, so we may be plagued with the things that we have done wrong, but we will learn. And the lesson makes us more than what we were. There will come a time, if it hasn't happened already, when lessons will no longer be frightening to you, but you will realize they're part of necessity, a part of this wondrous growth on this wonderful universe of the stars, which God has created for us. So he shall be tormented by fire and brimstone. Of course, fire represents purification, and brimstone destruction, because that's like a volcano erupting and sending a fire and brimstone. In the presence of the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascended up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receives the mark of his name. And it reminded me, I don't think I gave you the name of God, which was written on the forehead, We'll have to go back and do that because I don't want to leave one single mystery unrevealed. But this is talking about that there is no rest for us when we follow the path of the corporeal senses. We are never satisfied. We are always struggling. We're always wishing to be someplace else or to be on some other type of job. There isn't any peace for us. And so that is what it's talking about. There isn't any rest, day or night, when we follow the ways of self-will. It's just unhappiness. We're so subject to pain and illness and disappointments and death. And so believe me, the world of reality, the world of God, and what the world becomes through the eyes of one who has entered into the resurrection, all these things are abolished in it. It doesn't mean they don't happen. It doesn't mean the body doesn't die. But there is no misconcept of death because everyone knows the soul is eternal. So when we look at a corpse or a body, we say, oh, the soul has gone someplace else in a world we cannot see. Here is the patience of the saints, and here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. So it is saying that those who are subject to divine will and follow the path of divine will be led into the holy city, the New Jerusalem, into a new world, a world which is no longer fraught with the sorrows of the past. I have always described this world that when I was 25, I considered it hell. And when I was 50, and I'm going to be careful here, I'll give my age away. And when I was 50, I perceived it as a great classroom of which I was constantly learning and growing. And now I perceive it as a wondrous place of constant adventure with a lot of wonderful people who's on a long journey and thousands don't know they are. So it's exciting and it's wonderful. Do you suppose that if I just live longer it shall become heaven after all? Well, we'll have to wait and see. So I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Right, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord." Now die in Him, meaning we die of the corporeal world and live in the immortal resurrected Christ. "Yea," said the Spirit, "that they may rest from their labors, and their words do follow them." And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud sat one like unto a son of man. And of course there's a capital S, so this tells us that John is in this higher state of consciousness, and the great Christ consciousness, the indwelling Christ, comes riding forth and revealing, because the clouds, remember from the beginning we stated that clouds represented obscurity, representing that which is hidden. But now the indwelling Christ comes forth riding upon the clouds. And he has a golden crown, which means he shall rule henceforth. And in his hand is a sharp sickle. And so that sharp sickle reminds us of the old man that we see at the end of the year. He comes, the old man with a long beard, that comes with his sickle to reap the growth of the past year as we enter into a new year, the birth of a child. And almost the same thing is happening now. The reaping of our past is going to be brought before our attention. And the new child, the new birth in us, shall forever rule. Well, we'll be going into sickles and reaping next week. Don't run off frightened. I promise you, we still have the New Jerusalem. I'll be with you next week. Thank you.